Hey, Mitch.
Oh, hey, Ed, how are you? Whoa,
Yeah,
Ed, you don't look so good. You okay?
yeah. Well, to be honest, I haven't been sleeping too well. I've been trying to avoid sunlight. I've been spending my nights watching Kolchak, the Night Stalker.
Oh, I love the Night Stalker TV show. I learned all about monsters and how to kill vampires from that show.
Oh, come on. They're not real vampires.
Eh,
Ridiculous.
Hey, Ed, what's flying around behind you?
Oh, that's just Reggie, my pet budgie. He's fine. Don't worry about him.
Uh-huh. Whoa, what are you drinking there, Ed?
What? Don't be such a downer. Be positive.
Be positive. Hey, Ed, you got some of your drink there on your fang. I mean, your
What?
teeth. It's right over there.
Do I?
Right there. Yeah, now come here. I'll get it off there for. Come here.
Oh,
Come
okay.
here. Die, you filthy vampire.
Why?
Sorry, Ed. I had to do it. I thought you were a vampire.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I am a vampire. Oh.
Just start the show.
Hi, this is Ed Dollister,
And this is Mitch Halleck.
and welcome to another exciting episode of Mitch and Ed's Excellent Adventure. If it's your first time here, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. If you are a regular viewer or subscriber, thanks so much for coming back. Hope you enjoy today's show. Hey, Mitch, if you are new and you want to subscribe or find out a bit more about the show, what can you do?
Oh, Ed, it is simple as killing a Rakshasa with a crossbow. All you have to do is hit the subscribe button on the bottom, and you'll know when Ed and I go walking into the night looking for some mysterious creatures or just old TV shows on Mitch and Ed's Excellent Adventure right here on the mighty YouTube.
That's right. And we are looking at a classic today, a cult classic.
In 1972, on January 17th, I believe, 50 years ago,
Yes.
before he was TV show, the world was introduced to Carl Kolchak in his intrepid adventures in Las Vegas, where he stalked a vampire
Mm-hmm.
in the very first TV movie called The Night Stalker.
That's right.
Dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. So we're going to be talking about the Night Stalker, the telemovies, and also the classic TV series and beyond. Now, I was a bit too young to see this when it first came out. I think I saw it on maybe reruns. They played it late at night. I think in the 90s on Channel 10 is when I saw it. Quite a while ago, and consequently I bought the DVD box set and loved it. But were you watching it when it first came out? You would have been just a little.
I was going to say I was only 5. For once, I'm not that old, but no, 55 years ago, I was 5. But I did find out who the Night Stalker was a couple years later, and we'll get to that when the TV series started, because that was right around when the $6 Million Man was on and Planet of the Apes. That was around 74, 75. So I was aware of TV by that point, and I was like 7 or 8.
Mhm.
And that's when I first started watching Kolchak. Plus, they would rerun the TV movies all the time on the local station. So I then went back and watched the Las Vegas episode. Then we're going to talk about the Night Strangler, where he goes off to Seattle and fights Oscar Goldman of all people. And then the TV series started. So yeah, I figured out who Kolchak was, so much so that in the Halloween of 1974, my costume was Kolchak the Night Stalker. But sadly, a lot of folks thought I was just dressed as a hobo. You know, hobos did not have a tape recorder or a little, Kodak camera and a hat. They just thought I was like a little homeless guy. I was walking around with a suit, and I had the white shirt, and I had my Catholic school tie, and I had my Uncle Les's Kelly, his little hat that he wore there, the little straw hat. And I was the Night Stalker because he was like a superhero. He really was.
Yeah. You needed to have a yellow Mustang to drive around in. Maybe that would have helped.
I didn't have my license yet, though. But I'll tell you, I don't know. if you know the backstory of the Night Stalker, it originally was written by a fellow named Jeff Rice, who was a reporter who wrote this book that was actually, I know we know it's all about vampires and stuff, but the real story behind it is the mob controlled all of Las Vegas. They could do whatever they want back in the day. I mean, gangsters were everywhere and they literally had nobody stopping them. So he was going to write about this expose and expose all the corruption that was going on, but nobody would do anything about that. They wouldn't print those stories. They wouldn't report about them on the local news because that was the lifeblood of Las Vegas at the time. Yeah, exactly. And we're not kidding. You might end up in a ditch on the side of town and that's the end of you. So what he did is he took the idea of it and he wrote a book called The Kolchak Papers. And it was all about this reporter named Carl Kolchak who was out there, but it wasn't about mafia guys and gangsters. It was about vampires who were going around killing people and doing whatever they wanted, and no one believed them and nobody could stop them. So it was a weird analogy that he was trying to tell the story about what's really going on out there, that there's these monsters who are, you know, unstoppable and no one's listening to him. So by just switching the word gangsters to vampires, he came up with a whole new cult classic. And sadly, he got screwed over by the system too, because he gave the book unpublished to an executive out in ABC and said, hey, can I try to sell this as a movie? And they bought it, but they didn't pay him for it. This guy was kind of a sleazeball agent. He took it, he brings it to ABC. Dan Curtis, who was a famous producer for a TV show called Dark Shadows. Dan Curtis, also from Bridgeport, Connecticut, right down the street from me here.
Yeah.
They loved it. And they brought in Richard Matheson, who was a famous writer at the time. He did everything from The Twilight Zone.
Oh, look, he's just a huge science fiction author.
Yeah, so he took up Jeff Rice's script and punched it up a bit and, you know, added some stuff, but most of it's all there. I mean, whatever that was in the original Kolchak story is pretty much in the telemovie. And bang, that's where the Night Stalker show came about. And that was the TV movie that at the time, can you imagine this? 110 million people watched it. That was like almost as big as the MASH final episode, because there was only 3 channels back in the day, 3 networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And they had built this Night Stalker movie, did a great job advertising it, and everybody tuned in. Over a third of the country was watching, or a third of the TV sets that were out there were watching the Night Stalker. It was one of the biggest, highest rated TV movies of all time. And it told the story of Kolchak the Night Stalker, played by the great
Darren McGavin.
McGavin, who was like a known actor. He'd been in everything from like Dean Martin movies and Jerry Lewis and movies with him. And then he had a show called Riverboat, which was on for years with Burt Reynolds. He was on that show, but he was also famous for playing Mike Hammer, which was a, you know, rough and tough detective. He played that in the late 50s as well. So he was used to TV, but, you know, Darren McGavin was a fixture on American television. Everybody knew who he was, and he picked up the role as Carl Kolchak, the down and out, you know, a little rough around the edges reporter who had a big career, but we don't know what he did exactly. He did something wrong in New York.
That's right.
He was ostracized. And basically at the time, Las Vegas was not the glamour capital of the world. It was kind of a little seedy, mostly gambling and down and out. And so Carl was living in an apartment and kind of dated hookers, if we will say that. I mean, we really don't get into it, but it's implied that he was hanging around with the element, you know. He was kind of seedy in his own way. So,
and I think the way that Darren McGavin plays him, certainly in the TV series later on, originally was going to be a Hawaiian shirt. The character was supposed to be in a Hawaiian shirt and this and that, but Darren McGavin created the whole costume himself. You know,
the Kolchak in the book is the Hawaiian shirt, really obnoxious, not likable at all. And Darren McGavin's like, no, we're not playing it that way.
Yeah.
So he brought that. He ran out and bought that suit that he wears, that seersucker blue suit. That was just bought, like, I think at a thrift store or like, you know, a Salvation Army secondhand shop.
Yes.
You know?
Well, he was saying that the reason he bought that, he figured that was the last suit that he owned in his reporting job in New York, and that's he hasn't bought one since. So that's why he wears it, and he's got his runners. And I think his characterization is he's quite a fearless reporter. Like, he throws himself in there. He's, you know, in your face, and, you know, the police don't like him, the rest of the journalists don't like him, but he gets results which is really
Yeah.
quite good. Much to
No,
the chagrin of his boss
editor.
at INS.
Well, yeah, at the time it wasn't INS yet. That's the TV show.
Mm.
Back then he was working for the local newspaper,
Yep.
and that would be Tony Vincenzo, played by the great Simon Oakland, who
Yes.
goes again, just like Darren McGavin, has a long history of work in movies and TV. In fact, you could even see him in Psycho. At the very end, he plays the psychiatrist that tells the audience what's wrong with Norman Bates and why he has that fixation with his mother.
Oh,
That's Simon Oakland. Yeah, he was a great character actor. He pops up again on the Twilight Zone too. He's one of those guys that if you watch TV back in the day, you always saw Simon Oakland. He had a great delivery, a great distinctive voice and caricature.
yes.
He was fantastic as the world weary, you know, I don't know. He was friends with Carl Kolchak. He admired him. He respected all the stuff he would do. And he knows he'd bend the things. And he got on his nerves constantly. The poor man was going to explode from his blood pressure and
That's right.
screaming. You could hear him. And I love the way he always said Carl. He didn't say the R right. It was always like Carl, Carl. He had a certain way of like saying his name. I always think of it when I hear it in my head. I'm like, Carl, what are you doing, Carl? He'd wake him up at 2 a.m. because he'd be arrested by the cops and they'd
Yes.
have to bail him out. He's like, Carl, what are you doing now? You know, like that. And
Yep.
that show was actually really good. The first episode, the TV movie, you got Larry Linville, aka Frank Burns, who's working on cadaver there. They're doing the autopsy on the
Mhm.
first victim of the vampire. And it's great because it's kind of like the cadaver cam, because they have the camera looking up from the body cavity. So
Yep.
it's like if there's a camera right in the chest cavity of the victim and they're doing the autopsy on, that's what it was. Because I met Larry Linville years later, and I talked to him about Kolchak the Night Stalker. I know he was famous for Frank Burns, obviously on Mask, but he was so into it. He knew the name of the doctor because originally it was written to be an Indian doctor,
Mhm.
but they changed it to for Larry Linville. But they kept the name though, because he told me how the name didn't match up with his physical appearance. He's like, it was not written to be me. But he was so into it. And then he had Claude Akins, who was
Yes.
Sheriff Lobo years later, but he was the police officer in charge of the investigation too. And the other funny thing is Ralph Meeker, who plays the agent, I think he's for the FBI or whatever. He's working along with the police on this murder investigation. The ironic thing is he played Mike Hammer, the detective, too. So there you have two Mike Hammers in the same show at the same time. It's kind of like when Robert Downey Jr. and Benedict Cumberbatch are in
Oh
the
yeah,
Avengers.
the
movies.
Sherlocks.
It's like two Sherlock Holmes together. But anyway, yeah, it's a great story. Barry Atwater is the fellow that plays Janos.
The
I can never
vampire.
say. Yeah, it's Janos Skorzeny. And it's a great backstory. It's about this guy. They trace him there. Kolchak figures out the whole story. He's a real live vampire. Well, real dead vampire, whatever you want to do. And he's there in New York City. He's in Las Vegas, which is a perfect place because it's got the nightlife. People come alive at night. They sleep during the day mostly because they're working at nightclubs and gambling casinos and all that type of thing. It's just so cool. But there's parts of the book that really don't come across in the TV movie because I read the book. And they just talk about how disgusting his breath was, because he's a vampire and he's basically rotting and he's like drinking blood and eating dead bodies and stuff. So they just talked about how when he came to buy his car or when he came to rent the apartment from the landlord, all the people could say is, oh, the guy had the worst smelling breath I ever encountered. So it was like, that's just kind of nasty if you think about it. But anyway, it's a great movie, man.
It is, and they just recently released it on Blu-ray, the telemovies. So that, as you mentioned, was a huge success, a ratings winner. So of course, what came next? Another TV movie.
Yeah, the second one. Yeah, The Night Strangler.
Yep.
This time Kolchak's in Seattle. And the bad guy he's fighting is none other than our own Oscar Goldman, Richard Anderson, who plays Dr. Richard Malcolm, which is a doctor who dates back from the Civil War here in the United States. And he hasn't aged because he figured out a formula that'll keep him alive forever. But he has to kill so many victims in a certain amount of time and then extract fluid from their brainstem over a period of like 10 days or so. And then he disappears for 30 something days or 30 something years. And he comes back and he does it again and he disappears and comes back and on and on and on and on.
He has the technology.
He does. to keep himself alive forever. But we find Carl Kolchak this time down and out of work at a bar, and you got Tony Vincenzo sitting there having a drink, and he hears the sounds of Carl Kolchak yelling at some other reporter. He's like, "That's right, a vampire. I'm talking about a real vampire." He's like, "Come on, wake up." And he tells the bartender, he goes, "Do me a favor. Could you look around the corner? Is there a guy who looks like he just walked out of a stage, a road version of the Front Page, which is like an old musical comedy about newspapers?" And then he goes, "Uh-huh." He goes, "Uh-huh." And then you see Kolchak come around the corner. He's like, "Vincenzo." He goes, "You fired me in Las Vegas." "I didn't fire you." He goes, "Well, if you didn't fire me, then you can hire me again." So he gets a job working for the, I think it's the Seattle Sentinel. And is it John Carradine? It's an old actor from the horror movies that plays the head publisher or the owner. And
I can't recall.
no, and then the love interest this time is not Cara Lumley. It's she was in MASH. Joanne, it's not Joanne Flug, is it? Oh my God. She played Lieutenant Dish in the MASH movie, and she had a big career on television. Well, anyway, she's the romantic interest, if you will, in this. Not too much though, because Kolchak, he's kind of asexual in these movies because he gets so fixated on his story, because he's always trying to get the next big story that's gonna bust open. He wants to be the Woodward and Bernstein of monsters or corruption, and he wants to regain his fame, because we're always led to believe that Kolchak was really like a Walter Winchell. He was a really famous news reporter, but he screwed up somehow, whether he had an affair with the publisher's daughter or he got in trouble with the mob or something like that. They never really tell you what he did, but he had to leave and lose his job. Maybe he was trying to kill monsters in New York City, and he got blacklisted from there too. But anyway, he goes after Dr. Richard Malcolm, and all hell breaks loose. They have a big fight at the end. But it's funny, they film a lot of that in the Bradbury building, which is the building that, if people watch Blade Runner.
Yes.
And Demon with the Glass Hand, which was an Outer Limits episode that had Robert Culp in it, written by Harlan Ellison. It's the same building. It's got that ironwork with that exterior elevator that goes up. It's funny that they say it's Seattle, but it's this famous landmark that's out in Los Angeles that they use again and again and again. But anyway, after that, Ed, now you can get into the TV show, because
I was going to say they were going to do a third movie called The Night Killers, which was set in Hawaii of all places, and it was about these an alien invasion and robots taking over people that they kill, famous, like not historical figures, but people in power.
Larry Storch.
Yes,
it's probably Larry Storch or Wally Cox, some like TV guy at the time. Gavin McLeod.
It could be. You never know. Bernie Capel. It could have been.
Could have been Bernie.
Yep. But they decided to go for a series instead.
Yeah. But what's sad though? Dan Curtis, who was the producer of the original Night Stalker, Night Strangler, he had nothing to do with the series. He was out of it. And
same with Richard Matheson. He didn't come back to write the other ones.
Yeah, and it's kind of like it was set up for failure before it started, because you had some of the main figures that made the others so, the successful TV movies not involved with the TV series. And that right there had a little bad feeling about it. You know what I mean? And then McGavin wasn't too thrilled, because he already knew a Monster of the Week just really wasn't going to work. This is long before the X-Files. This was regular television, episodic TV, where there's none of these extended plot lines and there's, week to week. They don't have that storyline that they do now, that, you serialize stories. So he was a little leery of it, but they kind of bribed him. Honestly, they said, "Oh, you could use your production company, and we'll give you some money as a producer," and on and on. So
he wasn't officially a producer, but he took on a lot of producing responsibilities.
Yeah. And what's so funny too, because it was kind of like schlocky TV and they didn't really have a lot of faith in it, they had a writer's strike going on, and they were looking for people to run the show, and they just got a brand new writer, for a young fella, who's going to go on and create the Sopranos, David Chase. and he's also going to work on Northern Exposure. He's a young kid at the time. He just starts getting in the business, and they go, hey, do you want to be what we would call now like a story editor or whatever? Basically, he's a man of all talents. He punches up the script doctor, whatever you want to do. He takes all the stories and fixes them if they need new dialogue, if they need something to be tighter, it needs to make sense, and shorten this scene, extend this scene because we've got the actor here all day. We want to get the most out of it. He's over there writing furiously. And that's David Chase's first job, really. He's a young kid at the time. And he takes over the reins as the Night Stalker story consultant, I think was his official title or something like that. But he does a lot. But again, right off the bat, we got the Ripper, which is the Jack the Ripper in modern times. And if you watch that episode, a lot of the elements that are in the Night Stalker, I mean, a lot of them, like Kolchak hiding in a closet and the guy killing girls at night, walking the streets. It's almost like a truncated version of the Las Vegas vampire story, except it's Jack the Ripper. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense too, because that was one of the things McGavin was upset about, because it's such a tight 45-minute story. They got to streamline it. There's a lot of elements that make no sense. Like, why is Jack the Ripper alive after 100 something years? What is he doing? What, something about electricity? It was just kind of a hodgepodge bit of a story, but it was okay.
Having said that, it was still entertaining. And I've got to say, each of the episodes were, again, monster of the week, but they had different types of monsters. They had different types of like creatures from folklore and things like that. And I think, again, it was the chemistry between the leads and that go-getting tenacity of Kolchak, I think, that really pushed it through. It's a shame that they put it on at it was late at night, when it was they set it up again for failure, didn't they?
No, I was watching it then because I remember it was on Friday nights, and Friday night was a magic night because you didn't have to go to school the next day. You could stay up late. And I was a kid, and my older sisters would watch TV, Partridge Family, Brady Bunch, all that type of stuff. So I would kind of tag along, and I would get to watch $6 Million Man because it was like a superhero. And I'd see these ads and stuff. And then Planet of the Apes, I'd watch that too. And there was science fiction out there. And I heard about this Night Stalker show, and it was on late. I'm going to say 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. That was late for a kid that's like 7 years old or whatever. But I begged to stay up, and my family, they knew Darren McGavin because Darren McGavin was a little bit of a controversial figure here in Connecticut. Because one, my mom tells me about how he got picked up for speeding in New Haven, got arrested. And two, he lived in Westport for a time, and he was always in the newspaper because his house was on the highest point here in Westport, Connecticut. He was constantly battling the zoning people about what he could do to his house and put a larger structure on it. And there's all this guidelines and how you can build. So Darren McGavin was always a bit of a hothead around here. So I'm watching the show. It's scary as hell. You go from the Ripper, and I'm going to tell you, like you said, they have Monster of the Week. There are some outstanding episodes. I know it's like 20 episodes and they're kind of hit or miss, but they tried a lot. But when they hit it out of the ballpark. They had the one about the zombie. Oh my God, I could close my eyes to this day. You got Darren McGavin in the back of like a hearse in a junkyard, putting salt inside the zombie's mouth, and he has to sew the lips up and then light a bunch of candles in a circle around it to kill the spell, the voodoo spell that's on this. Oh my God, the zombie wakes up as he's doing it. And the witch doctor woman, whatever, she writes Kolchak in chicken blood. And whenever she assigns the victim, the zombie gets up and then goes after that person. So she writes Kolchak, and here's the zombie waking up in the middle of the junkyard. And there's the Night Stalker, Kolchak. I mean, stitching up his mouth. I remember screaming, just had nightmares about that too. And there's a lot of very familiar actors that we're going to see go on. In fact, Huggy Bear himself is in the episode I'm talking about. Antonio Fargas. Yeah, he's in the zombie. And Scatman Crothers, who's going to be a big character actor on other shows later on. He's in the episode too.
Oh, you get James. There's Jamie Farr. You mentioned Larry Linville, Eric Estrada.
Oh, geez. And then there's a lot of classic people. You had Margaret Hamilton, the Witch of the West.
Yes.
From the Wizard of Oz. She shows up in a couple episodes. I know John Carradine does. The voice of Kit. He was on the Las Vegas vampire episode. William Daniels?
Yes.
Yeah, he shows up as because you can tell by the distinctive voice he
Yes, you
has.
can. Yes.
Yeah, that's him. He's on there too.
Kathy
And
Lee Crosby, who
oh,
plays.
she was the woman that's stealing people's age.
Yes.
The succubus. I think she was the succubus.
Yeah.
Oh, and Tom Skerritt from Aliens and MASH. He shows up as this senator or congressman who sells his soul to Satan to get a political career, because there's a whole episode where there's demonic possession going on. There's a real creepy one about a doppelganger, about this guy who has a ghost chasing him, but he's living inside a church because he can't go outside, because if it sees him, it'll kill him or something. It'll burst into flames. Oh man. And then there's there's the werewolf on the cruise ship.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Dick Olay, I believe his name was, the actor who was also on a lot of the TV series back in the day. And they had to make they had to cut the silver buttons off the captain's shirt. Now, years later, you'll have the Love Boat. But imagine if you had Kolchak on the Love Boat and he's stealing Captain Stubing's buttons off his dress.
Well,
uniform.
you know that Darren McGavin was a guest star on 2 episodes of the Love Boat.
How could he not be? Everybody was on those shows.
Yeah, that's true. I think you were, weren't you, at some stage?
I was a couple.
You played Adam Rich's twin brother, weren't you?
I did. I had the bowl cut then, that Dutch boy look. But like you said, the show is kind of cursed for real reasons, because terrible time slots get moved around, preempted here and there. The ratings weren't there because people love those TV movies, but how many times can you kill a vampire? How many times can you meet a werewolf? It got old. If they kept to that formula where they did this a TV movie here and there, it would have been like every Halloween. If they had like this year Kolchak meets a werewolf, this year Kolchak meets aliens from outer space, it would have been great just to keep it as a series of TV movies. But no, they jumped the gun and they did the weekly show, and it just didn't work out. It's unfortunate though.
It is, but it did help the career of a young Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis.
Oh, they did the one called Chopper, which is about, of all things, a headless motorcycle gang member who goes around with a sword chopping people's heads off to get his revenge. And Kolchak has to reunite the decapitated skull with the body, and that's why they'll put it out, because apparently back in France when they had the revolution, when they were using the guillotine and killing people, if they didn't bury the heads with the bodies would rise up and look for their heads. It's a lot of weird stuff I learned from that TV show. But the other thing is too, there was really cutting edge science fiction going on there. They had UFO stories. They had AI before it was called AI. They had like artificial intelligence where he met robots that were coming to life. Mr. Ring was the episode I'm thinking of. Then there was
now he's a doorbell. So it's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. The energy eater. There was like this thing, and then a couple episodes they kind of ripped off, like an old Star Trek episode where they had the Horta and Captain Kirk. It was this monster that was living in the mines to protecting its eggs below. Well, in the Night Stalker, they did the same thing where they were building this cavern underneath this big building. I think David Doyle, who goes to play Bosley on Charlie's Angels years later, I think he's in the movie or the show, and the construction crew is waking up this monster that lives below, and it's this terrible alligator suit. It's really one of the worst costumes you'll ever see, and they were taking its eggs, and it was basically the same Star Trek plot, and they just kind of switched them for the Night Stalker. Like, who's paying attention? These kids, they don't remember. There's no reruns. There's no VCRs.
It was black and white TV. You're watching, like a tiny screen. So
it's kind of funny too. There's a lot of B-roll of Darren McGavin driving around Chicago in his Mustang convertible, and then they'd cut it to like the streets of LA. You're like, wait a second, how did he go from being on the river down there in Chicago? So now there's this tall Los Angeles looking building in the background. So they worked around it. They didn't have much money for a set, but they did have a great group of supporting characters on that show too.
My favorite, Updike.
Well, it's Ron Updike too, but they also had Miss Emily, who was actually on the Ripper episode as a different character. The actress is playing somebody else, but she then comes on as the advice column. That was like the lovelorn, the Dear Abby, you would write to. And then there's a couple episodes where Kolchak fills in for her and does some of her letters and such. Right. I mean, it was a really cute family they created there, because you had the grumpy dad with Tony Vincenzo, and then you had the annoying little brother, the Ron Updike, who was always tattletaling on him
Yeah.
and telling him what's going on. And then you had Miss Emily, who was kind of like the mom figure, and then Carl, who was just running around doing whatever he wants, getting in trouble every week on the Night Stalker show. One of the best ones is when he meets the Rakshasa, which is this Hindu monster, which takes the shape of anybody you trust. And the
Yes.
only way to kill it is with a crossbow. And the arrow has to be from, I can't remember which type of tree, might be a dogwood tree, but it's called Horror in the Heights. And it takes place in a Jewish neighborhood. And there's swastikas up on the wall. So they think it's Nazis and like skinheads and stuff like that. But it's not. It's because then you learn that the swastika was the symbol from Hindu mysticism for like good luck to wear away demons and stuff. And then the Nazis took that symbol and corrupted it for their own stupidity. But that is a great episode, because not only do you learn about that type of stuff, but at the very end, the monster's coming towards Kolchak, but it's in the form of Miss Emily, which is, we just talked about, his like, friend at the newspaper. So you don't know if it's really Miss Emily or not. And he's got the crossbow, and she's getting closer and closer and closer. And it's this big, hideous monster, like this swamp looking thing. And it will, rip the flesh off your bones. And at the very last minute, he shoots the arrow and he kills her right in the chest. And then she turns into the monster and stuff, and Kolchak saves the day. But that was a real tense episode. I remember watching that going, oh my God.
And it makes you suspicious of Indian restaurants in Jewish communities. I remember that.
Well, not only that, the guy that played that was Bernie, or was it Barry Gold? It was another guy you'd know from like his voice, distinctive from cartoons for years. But he was on that episode, and I remember the Night Stalker's like, "You're not Indian." He goes, "No, man, I'm Bernie something or Barry something." I remember, but it was a character actor. It wasn't Bruno Kirby, but it was somebody like that.
Unfortunately, with the late night time slot, and Darren McGavin was getting tired of doing not only the acting but his unofficial producing role and everything like that. So he asked to
the voiceover on the trailers. You'd see it on the DVDs, like, this is Darren McGavin next week on the Night Stalker, which is really, you don't do that nowadays, but back in the day they would have the actors.
That's right.
So he was wearing a lot of hats.
So they he asked to be released for the last few I think it was like the last 3 episodes.
Yeah, well, they had 22 ordered, but they only did 20. The last 2 they never filmed. Yeah.
So they decided to release them because basically the ratings were tanking, unfortunately, and it was cancelled after only 1 season. However, they did bring it back. They did like replay it later, a few years later, late at night, and it was another success.
No, they replayed the original Night Stalker shows. Yeah, it was on CBS late night. That was great. But then they also did what they did with the Indiana Jones movies. They made little movies. What they did is they took 2 episodes, and they would do this with the Green Hornet and a lot of stuff when I was a kid. They would take 2 TV episodes, an hour-long episodes, and they'd splice them together and repackage them.
Yeah, and they got Darren McGavin to do some like voiceovers to stitch them together.
So, yeah. I mean, and it was kind of awkward because I do remember the one that has Eric Estrada. It's about Monte's Aztec rituals.
That's right. They were in the football stadium arena or whatever.
Yeah. And they're going to sacrifice him.
Yeah.
To Quetzalcoatl or some type of Aztec god or something like that. And you're right. They mishmashed it or smashed it up. What's the word I'm looking for when they mash things up? Mashups.
Yeah. That's
they took another, and you'll hear him right in the middle of the episode. I had to go back because meanwhile there was something else happening on the other side of town. If you didn't know that it was 2 episodes put together, you probably would have watched it as a kid and not thought much about it. But I was just thinking, Richard Kyle is another one that you'll see. He comes on as this Native American demon or something. It's called like the Raven. He takes the shape as a shapeshifter. He takes the shape of a wolf, a raven, and at the end he turns into this big guy, and he's trying to I can't remember what he was stealing, but he was
this was before Richard Kill was Jaws.
This was before he was famous for all that stuff.
Those, so there's lots of great cameos, lots of great performances. Again, it didn't last very long. But
No, no, no.
it also inspired, Chris Carter, the creator of the X
The X-Files.
Files, to create that series. In fact, they
Yeah.
wanted Chris Carter did try to get Darren McGavin to come back onto the show to play Cole Kolchak, but
Well, he did come on it. No, he did play some character that
he
was the
did. He
guy that
played.
started
He
the
played an
X-Files.
FBI agent who was the creator of the X Files. He didn't play
Yeah,
Cole Kolchak, but he did come back.
he did, but then he was supposed to come back a second time, but then McGavin had a stroke and couldn't do it. Yeah, yeah. In fact, and they got Emmett Walsh to come in and play his brother. And
Yep.
yeah, it was kind of bittersweet though. But I was gonna say there was a terrible, terrible remake. Speaking of X-Files, Frank Sponitz, is that his name? He was on the X-Files show or whatever his name was. He went and made the revival.
I think. Yeah.
Who, he made the revival
with
the
Stuart Townsend.
Oh, it was Stuart Townsend and I can't remember. Gabrielle Union, I believe, was the actress's name. She was like his cohort. She was like the Mulder and Scully. She didn't believe in anything, and then he had this weird backstory where his wife was taken, and he had some tattoo on his hand or his arm that was linked to this, and he was trying to solve the mystery of the government. Like what? They try to make it into the X-Files, and Tony Vincenzo was like a war veteran, and there was a backstory about him in the Gulf War or Vietnam War or something. I remember, but it was a mess. That show, it lasted like 8 episodes. And it was all over the place. Like the time slot, it was the curse of the Kolchak. It was all over. They couldn't figure out where to put it. The ratings were horrible. I think another one they had the last 2 or 3 episodes. The only way you could see them was you had to watch them on iTunes or buy the DVD box set, which I do have, just because I want to watch them. And I don't know why, because it was just utter trash. Funny though, Darren McGavin makes an appearance in that, even though he's dead at that point. They took footage of him and they CGI'd him in a scene. So as the new Carl Kolchak is walking through the newsroom in the background, you can see the old Carl Kolchak like putting his hat on real quick. Yeah, but I don't know. But Kolchak does live on because Jeff Rice had the rights to the character and sold it to Moonstone Comics, which is a comic book company, and they put out a bunch of Kolchak comics. And then there was some brand new stories. There was some prose novels here. Here's one called the Kolchak Chronicles. It's all famous authors writing stories about Carl Kolchak. And then one of the greatest books ever was the Kolchak 25th anniversary companion, which talks about all the episodes, all the cast, who was in it. They redid this book for the 30th anniversary. And now that it's the 50th anniversary, there's a special project out there. It's a Kickstarter campaign, and it's going to be all brand new Kolchak stories. And it's got a cover from my good friend, Mr. Jerry Ordway, comic book artist extreme, who does all the Trificon posters. And he also did Superman and Shazam. He did the cover for the brand new Kolchak 50th anniversary collection. And what is it? But it's Kolchak on the steps of the house from Las Vegas, encountering the Las Vegas vampire. It's a really cool image. And you can see it right now. And that's there. So Kolchak's still alive. In fact, Ed, isn't your favorite actor connected to a revival movie of the Night Stalker that they've been trying to do for years?
No, it's funny you should mention that. I only just found out about that recently, where they were looking at doing a movie version. Walt Disney actually were looking at doing a movie version with Johnny Depp as Kolchak. And I could look, given his association with Dark Shadows and Tim Burton, I suppose, there's a bit of a link there. But I think it would be quite a different sort of story. I don't know. Darren McGavin was he was one of a kind, I think. And I think you need someone a bit more grizzled, and I don't even know who could play it today.
You know what I thought would be a good one is the guy from Malcolm in the Middle. He was also the
Bryan Cranston.
Bryan Cranston. Yeah, he was on Breaking Bad. He looks like the average guy, because the whole thing about Kolchak is he's really the average guy. He's not a superhero. He's not like Indiana Jones. Well, kind of like Indiana Jones. He's just a guy who gets stuck in situations, but he's also scared to death. There's the best part is that you'll see Darren McGavin have those wide-eyed reactions
Yes.
and yelling and like running for his life because he's scared out of his
Yeah.
wits on a couple of those episodes when he meets the monsters and the vampires about to grab his like, ah, and he's running too. So there's that real human quality about it. And I could see Johnny Depp pulling it off as long as he doesn't come off as smug.
Yeah.
You got to be that, you got to have that what's the word I'm looking for, where you really don't believe in it and you got to be made to believe that whatever
skeptical. I think he's got to be
because Kolchak, he doesn't believe in vampires. He's not this guy that's out there that knows the history of the vampire, the history of the werewolf. He finds out and puts it together. Like he's like, well, what is this murder here, and why is this so unusual? And then let me investigate. And then he starts to put the story together about this supernatural occult monster that's doing stuff. He doesn't walk into it like Fox Mulder, who has like this encyclopedia mind of every UFO abduction. He's kind of like Scully, but he's also trying to make a living. He's kind of like Indiana Jones. He's like a grave robber, kind of shady, that you might be a little doing something on the side trying to make a name for himself. It's kind of selfish, but he saves the world all the time. He's not, think about all the time he saved us from vampires and werewolves and rakshasas and all that stuff. So
that's right. Headless
motorcycle guys. What's funny? The reason I didn't like the TV series is because everything took place in Chicago. So the few times he wasn't in Chicago, like he went on the cruise ship or he went to Los Angeles, which was like a sequel to the Las Vegas Vampire, because this time it was a prostitute at night, this woman that was coming alive, and she was there, and he sets fire across. They also had a lot of problem with violence on that show, because you got to remember, this is in the early 70s. They got away with a lot that you probably couldn't get away with today, but it was still, TV, and kids could watch it. I mean, you had people getting their, throats ripped open. I mean, things, even Starsky and Hutch, when we covered that show, there's a lot that's on that show now. Language, sexual situations, drugs, that doesn't fly in the sanitized world that we live in now. So it is really like a time capsule. When you go back and watch those episodes, you're like, whoa, they got away with this on that show. They could say this back then. So, and
I'd certainly recommend, they've just not re-released, they've just released the series on Blu-ray.
It did.
Actually, hard to come by. A really good it's a really good transfer with some special features as well. So it's definitely worth picking up and seeing, because again, it's a cult TV series. People know of it, but I'm not, maybe not too many people have, actually seen it or watched it in its entirety. So I certainly can recommend, having, recently just rediscovered it, is go watch it, because you will be entertained on the edge of your seat with some
only 20, like I said, 20 episodes.
Yeah.
It used to be on Netflix, but they're not anymore. And you know where they are? I don't know if they have Peacock down there.
Oh, we've got Paramount Plus, I think. Is that what it is? Is that?
Oh yeah, but it's a weird rights issue, because the TV movies were made by ABC TV, ABC Network. ABC is now owned by Disney. So that's why when you said there was some Disney interest, I could see that. But the TV series was made by Universal Studios, which owned like the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman. Universal did like all the TV shows back in the 70s. So the television series here is Universal. The movies are Fox now. They're owned by Disney and stuff. So in fact, when you buy this, you only get the TV series. You don't get the TV movies. Those are separate purchase because they can't put them together. So that's a little of the backstory, which might be one of the reasons why it gets held up a lot, because they're like, well, who's going to own this and stuff? There's no merchandise to speak of. You can find a Kolchak replica hat for like $100-something bucks. You could probably buy that seersucker suit if you look around.
Yeah, you probably could. There's a lot of a lot of fans have created 12-inch versions of the figure. Things
I've
like
seen
that.
There's no action figures that I would buy that in a minute, like Mego. We talk about Mego all the time, and they always come back with like.
I'm not surprised that Mego don't bring out a Kolchak.
I mean, if they did a Toxic Avenger, which they just did recently, and they did the Hammer movies with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, I would buy a Carl Kolchak action figure in a heartbeat if it came with like a little mallet and a little wooden stake or a little crucifix or a
Yeah.
cross.
I think
Or
they
a
may have.
tentacle.
I'll have a look. I'll have a look if I can find an official version of a Kolchak figure. I'll put it up now.
There was a
Um,
comic book spoof, which I'll show you the cover of. I have it. It was in a Marvel comic in the early 70s called Arg, and it was like a horror Mad Magazine type of thing.
mhm.
And they did like a 12-page version of the Night Stalker. And it's definitely Darren McGavin. It's definitely Tony Vincenzo.
Yeah.
They just can't call them that, but you kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. It's the Night Stalker when you see it. But I don't know if they did bring it back. Would you set it in modern times or would you set it back in the 70s?
Well, I mean that would work, but you've already got a show set in the 70s called The Night Stalker. So I think probably
Well,
trying
I'm just
to,
saying because
you know,
with Google, the thing of it is with some of the charm about that show is he'd have to go to a library. He'd have to go look at a book.
Yeah.
He'd have to go to a museum. It's kind of like Indiana Jones. You can't have that character in modern age because there's some, charm about being in the 30s and, get an airplane and go to the far reaches of the jungle to find stuff. You can't just do a satellite map and just, sit at your desk and Google how to kill a vampire or what's the stuff around it. But anyway,
true. But maybe if he was an older character, like Darren McGavin probably wasn't that old when he was probably in his 40s, I suppose, when he was doing it.
40.
But if you did it today, someone who's a little bit older, who's not tech savvy, who might
be
those...
me.
That's
might be
right.
me. As
That's
we
right.
know every week on this show, I'm like, I have no idea how to do anything when it comes to technology.
Yet you prevail, and you do know how to subscribe to the show. So how can you let the listeners know what should they do?
Ed, it's simple as pounding a stake in the heart of the living dead. All you do, it's a lot easier than that. You just pound that subscribe button right there, and you too will be able to go on a stalking adventure with Ed and I into the world of TV, movies, and more. And please give us some suggestions on where you want to go, because we sit there and debate week after week what we should do next for an excellent adventure. And we keep saying, let's stick to like TV shows in the 70s and movies, but there's a lot of other things out there in the 80s and the 90s.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And I was thinking, we did have a recommendation for Greece, which is great.
Yep. Greece is a good one.
Yeah, I think so. We've got there's so many good things out there. Some great TV series, Space 1999. You were talking about Battle Beyond the Stars, The Humanoid. There's all these different movies and TV.
Can't Stop the Music.
What's that?
Can't Stop the Music.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, we could do that. How it's a cult hit down there, but down here it's not a hit at all.
It's a hit, but there's another word in front of that. HIT, I think, is what you call it. So,
yeah. Wait a minute.
Anyway, signing off this week. Thanks for watching Mitch and Ed's Excellent Adventure. I'm Ed Dollister.
And I'm Mitch Halleck.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching.